Hello there and good morning. Welcome to NST Insight, a forum where we discuss the latest and hottest topics pertaining to Malaysia. I'm Azaria Tagaya, your host for today's forum, and today we're talking about climate change, or more specifically, weather extremes, weather fluctuations that have been happening more frequently as of late. But the question is, why is it happening now? Why is it more pertinent now for us to take notice? And what exactly can we do as individuals to actually help in this situation? Now, before we continue with the show and the discussion today with our panelists, let's take a look at this short video playback to give you an idea about what today's topic is all about. Let's watch. Global warming, which causes climate change, has now returned to the center of attention following major tragedies and natural disasters around the world, including in Malaysia, the latest one being the mud flow incident in Yan Kedah. According to a report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change (IPCC), the phenomenon of global warming due to greenhouse gas (GHG) emissions from human activities has greatly affected the global climate system, and it is now at an alarming level. If no drastic action is taken to reduce GHG emissions, the world is expected to face more devastating natural disasters. It is understood the Southeast Asian region has ranked top in terms of the number of natural disasters in the last 30 years, with more than 90% of them categorized as climate disasters. And Malaysia, as a country in Southeast Asia, needs to pay more serious attention to the warnings. The number of floods have increased over the past 20 years, with losses estimated at more than 8 billion ringgit. Taking Kuala Lumpur as an example, studies show that the intensity of thunderstorms and extreme rains has increased by 30% over the past 30 years, thus causing more frequent floods. Thus, the projection that extreme weather events in Southeast Asia, including Malaysia, will worsen in the future is worrying. Looking at the scenarios, the question arises whether Malaysia is ready to face the impact of climate change. Indeed, the question is whether we are ready to face climate change and global warming. It's a topic that has been it's been around for some time now, but now Malaysians are paying attention more than ever due to the recent events that have happened in the country. Now, to talk to us more about this topic today, we've invited three distinguished guests to join us for today's NST Insight. I'll begin by introducing the gentleman on the far left of the table. We have Muhammad Helmi Abdullah, Director General, Malaysian Meteorological Department, or Met Malaysia. Hi, Encik Helmi. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes.
Next to Encik Helmi, we have Professor Datuk Dr. Azizan Abu Sama, meteorological expert at UM. Hi, Professor. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And next to me, I have Dr. Renard Siu, Climate Change Advisor, CENT GPS, Adjunct Professor of Innovation and Sustainability, UNITAR. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. It's our pleasure to have all of you gentlemen joining us today to talk about this very important topic, climate change and also global warming. I think I'll start with you first, Dr. Renard. Now, before we go deeper into the topic about why it's happening now and what we can actually do to help the situation, can you just take us through about the actual phenomena of climate change and what are some of the effects of climate change that we've seen as of late?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's very clear that extreme weather events, floods, droughts, forest fires are very strongly associated with climate change. As we have seen, in the media, the December floods that took place in Malaysia. Data is very clear. It shows us that, data from NASA in the 1950s, extreme weather events only covered about 0.1% of our Earth's surface, yes. But that number has already increased by about 14.1%. So the chances of this happening is definitely more likely, and it's happening more in a more severe manner, I would say, given all the reports that have surfaced, right, in the past couple of months or even years. And obviously, this is not just Malaysia that's being affected. Yes. Even prior to the floods in December, we've heard about floods happening in New York, in Germany, and China, almost as a back-to-back event, I would say. So this is definitely something that is alarming. The IPCC report that came out last year, the UN Sec Gen, Antonio Guterres, made it very clear that climate change is a code red for humanity. It is a code red for humanity. It's a red signal, and we have to start waking up.
I see.
To this.
So when we say climate change, though, we always think about glaciers melting, floods, extreme rainfall. But what about the extreme weather fluctuations, especially in Malaysia? People always joke about it's summer all year round, but that's not true. There are hot days, there are hotter days, there are some days which are extremely humid, and there are days which are cool, which people would say like it's London weather without the wetness, of course. But on these sort of days, do we need to actually be worried that this is actually an effect of climate change that we don't realize?
Well, there's definitely fluctuations, right, in weather patterns, and one direct impact that we've seen is actually the livelihoods of those that are involved in agriculture. So there, obviously, it's an industry that's heavily dependent on weather. So with prolonged floods and droughts that are happening almost back to back, right, it obviously has an impact on some of the crop yields, especially for farmers in the northern region, I would say. Yeah. Both northern and southern regions of Malaysia. They've definitely reported losses, right, in crop yields. So this impacts livelihoods. But also more severely, I think it's heeding the warnings. In such extreme weather conditions, there might be times when they might lead to rise in sea levels, yes, which leads to floods, and also people's livelihoods might be in danger. And I think it's important to just bear in mind and keep those signals.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, let's move on now to Professor Datuk Dr. Azizan. Now, Professor Datuk, when we talk about floods that have happened in Malaysia, can you give our viewers sort of an insight to how this actually happens? How does climate change directly result in the floods that we see here?
I think if you were to read the IPCC, the forecast for extreme weather in Malaysia is what, 44% or 50%, is it? The uncertainties.
Yeah.
So, it's quite rich for us to do research on, yes, because of the uncertainties. Yes. So there is an uncertainty about 50%. Most of the time, if in the temperate region, it's about 80, 90%, but here it's about 50%, which means that the signal of climate change and natural variability is still very difficult to differentiate because of the IPCC only say about 50%.
Yeah.
So that is the scientific aspect that you must also consider. So the main driver of floods in Malaysia is during the northeast monsoon, and it is related to what phenomenon called the cold surge. And the cold surge, the wind comes all the way from Siberia, and it comes over, and then when it comes over, there's interaction between sea surface temperature, there's interaction with what you call, moisture, more moisture being transported by the wind, because it takes more moisture as it comes across the South China Sea. And in a normal northeast monsoon, I think Helmi can correct me, it's about what, 8 cold surge in a normal one?
4 to 6.
4 to 6.
Those are the significant ones. There are more, but those are the significant ones.
So the cold surge is the one that brings you the rain. So in order for you to predict the cold surge, you have to go right all the way to Siberia to know what's happening in Siberia. So this is what you call a mid-latitude forcing. So what is interesting in the sense is that if the Arctic warms up, then the circumpolar Arctic circulation will decrease. So the cold air then breaks into the Siberian region, and the Siberian region becomes colder in winter. And that also may produce a much more intense cold surge. So what I'm trying to say, on one hand, if you look at the general circulation model that the CMIP-6 is giving, is saying that in summer especially, because they predict that summer rainfall is going to go up, but the winter rainfall is going to go down. So what I'm trying to say, CMIP itself cannot capture this. So it's a very, to me, as a researcher, it's a very nice research that needs to be done for us to contribute to understanding how climate change is going to impact on climate variability, especially the northeast monsoon for Malaysia. And I think we have published a few papers already, myself with my group, to look into it. So now, what I'm trying to get at is that the major research is finding that the northeast monsoon, there's a paper that came out, is much stronger in our region. And that's why you can see there's a lot of erosion in the East Coast now, since the 1990s. And so it's a converse to what CMIP 6 say. Because CMIP 6 is saying that the northeast monsoon is going to be weak. But it does not. So what I'm trying to say, the threat for research is still there, because the uncertainty is about 50%. Now, when it comes to sea level rise, sea level rise, if you have the northeast monsoon stronger, it will then pile up the water. So the sea level rise that you're talking about is 1 meter, right? If you have a more intense monsoon. While when you talk about the global sea level rise from ice melt and thermal, that's about 3.2 mm per, 3.2 mm per year, which I think you times it 50 years, it's only about 0.3. So the dynamics of the northeast monsoon controls the erosion more than the slow rise that you're talking about of the sea level, you know, when you talk about global sea level rise. So there's a lot to be done at the moment that we need to put in. The more research needs to be taken so that we can have a right picture of what's happening in the country. That's, I think, you know, it is, to me, it's a challenge to the Malaysian academics.
Indeed, a challenge indeed. And we'll talk more about the rising sea levels as well as its effect on Malaysia after this. But I'd like to move on to Met Malaysia. Encik Helmi, a lot of eyes are on Met Malaysia, especially after the floods, but perhaps not before. So what are some of the steps that Met Malaysia have actually formulated to help Malaysians actually prepare for incidents like what has happened in the past few months?
Maybe let me correct you by saying that we have been in the limelight, in and out of it. If you remember the 2006-2007 heavy rainfall, heavy floods in Johor. We were in the news most of the time, and also the 2014 heavy floods in Kelantan, especially, we were also in the spotlight.
Indeed. So I think perhaps I should correct the. Perhaps I should correct the statement. What I'm meaning is people often look to Met Malaysia to prepare themselves for these sort of incidences, but they don't really pay attention. I think there's not enough awareness of
Maybe
what.
They have short memory.
Exactly, about the warnings that Met Malaysia has actually put out. So perhaps you can enlighten us on the initiatives that you have actually formulated to help Malaysians in these incidences.
To mitigate the impacts of climate change, of course, you need to beef up your early warning system. So Met Malaysia is the agency which is tasked with monitoring the weather, and of course we issue weather forecasts and weather warnings. In order to improve the weather forecasting, weather warning capabilities, we have to first improve the observational system. So Met Malaysia has embarked on a project to upgrade its monitoring station. We are in the process of converting some of our conventional, because some of our observations are still conventional, they are still manual, they're operated by volunteers, so we are in the process of automizing them so that the data can be received in real time, because real-time data is very important when you monitor weather. If volunteers monitor the weather, the data can only be received in probably a month's time when they send the data. And the second one is our remote sensing instrument, radar, for example. We are increasing our radar to another 8 this year, and by the end of the year we would have about 19 operating meteorological radars in the country, so to better monitor the current weather condition. And of course, to complement that, we are also upgrading our satellite receiving station in our headquarters to better receive satellite data from satellites such as Korea. We are currently receiving satellite data from China, from the US, as well as from Japan. Okay, that's in terms of monitoring. And to those data has to be analyzed. Okay, they have to be analyzed and compared with outputs from models, numerical weather prediction models, we call them. They are models computer models which are written by experts, meteorological experts, which will be able to produce outputs of what the weather is going to be for the next few days. And these outputs will be analyzed together with the present weather condition, analyzed by our meteorologists. And based on this, they will issue warnings, weather warnings of what is to be expected for the next few days. And the third aspect, of course, is dissemination, because once the warnings have been issued, they have to be disseminated to the intended recipients, to disaster management agencies. So, of course, you need to upgrade your telecommunication capabilities, because we are utilizing or leveraging on all the telecommunication technologies at the moment. You name it, we are on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We use SMS for dissemination of our warnings. We are live on TV, of course, on RTM twice daily. And we are also using any possible means of disseminating our warnings. Of course, our mobile application, which is known as My Cuaca, is another way for us to disseminate the warnings to those who are savvy with ICT. So, in fact, all these are being upgraded by Met Malaysia to produce early warnings, which can be used by disaster management agencies, can be used by the public for their safety. So we have seen improvement, of course, in the forecasting in our early warning capability. We were able to capture some of the severe weather events, because for last year's the heavy rainfall, we were able to issue warnings as early as on the 11th of December. So between the 11th to the 19th of December, we issued a total of 16 heavy continuous weather warnings for Malaysia.
Indeed, the mechanisms are there, especially for those of us who work in the media, like myself. We know that the warnings have been put out there. We broadcast the warnings for Met Malaysia as well. But the problem is, such as the floods that happened in December, what actually happened there? Why do people only try to open their eyes once the situation has already occurred, when in fact the warnings have been broadcast earlier? What do you think is the issue there?
Probably one of the issues is awareness, because the East Coast, I think East Coast people, they are used to floods year-round.
Indeed, better
they're used
prepared.
to every year they'll experience floods during the northeast monsoon season.
Yes.
And those in the West Coast, they only experience mainly flash floods. Flash floods which are of short duration, less than 6 hours. Those are flash floods which normally occurs in the afternoon. So during the northeast monsoon period, sometimes when there's a strong surge, because the December flood was an exceptional event, because you have three factors coming into play. You have a strong monsoonal surge, cold surge, as Datuk mentioned, which arrived in our country, and some of the surge, the part of the surge, monsoonal surge, were deflected into the Straits of Malacca, because there was this typhoon Rai in the vicinity, causing further complication challenges to the existing situation. And also there was a vortex, a low pressure weather system which formed over the straits of the South China Sea and moving westward into Peninsular Malaysia. We of course detected the presence of the vortex early and monitored it, but as it moved inland, that was when the problems arise at that time. It was very challenging because there was interaction between the vortex. It was weakening as it crossed Peninsular Malaysia, but when it reached the Straits of Malacca on around the 17, 18, it strengthened because the cold surge was coming in, part of the cold surge was coming in through the Straits of Malacca. So that was what transpired. Because of that, because of the strengthening of the vortex, the west coast was heavily affected by heavy downpour.
Indeed, indeed.
Yep, right.
Professor Dato' Dr. Azizan, what do you think about that, about the recent floods that happened and the connection between the information dissemination and the public's response to the floods? Why do you think it was as worse as it was?
I think the gravity of the flood on the 17th is already known. I mean, you know, people were all caught up in all the jelutong,
Yeah.
lots of people. 17 on the 17th, not on the 18th, right? And sad to say, I think the media did not really do its job. I mean, in my opinion.
Perhaps not enough.
Yeah, it's not enough. And I think I did mention that, that, you know, the media should have done a better job. But the other one is the fact that, you know, I'm very attracted to how Hong Kong managed their extreme weather. Because Hong Kong put black, the situation black.
Color-coded.
They go color-coded. And when it's black, everybody stays at home. Even if you're in the office, you stay in your office. You don't go out.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say, if you have a very definite coding of how the public should respond to, especially in Kuala Lumpur or the Klang Valley, because as I said earlier, the asset that is impacted in the Klang Valley is much more. The number of people that is going to be impacted is also more.
Yes.
I mean, you know, as an example, I take the 2017 flooding in Penang. The core of the heavy rainfall actually is not in Penang. The core is in Kuala Muda area, if you look into the satellite. But in Kuala Muda, the impact is quite small. It's all paddy field.
Minimal.
So the paddy field get all flooded. That's about it. And the impact is less. But the tail bit, the one that occurred in Georgetown, that's the one that caused a major issue. And that 2017 is similar in the sense with the 2021 because it developed overnight very fast.
Indeed.
Yes.
And there's interaction between the vortex and the
Warm water.
and the warm water, and it developed very fast. I mean, 24 hours. I mean, it's not something that is abnormal because when you think about what's happened in UK, there is a 24-hour storm in UK too, which I think the Met Service predicted wrongly. I think that, you know, there's a very famous case in UK, I think in 1987. But even then, you know, I would argue that even if you get 6 hours of forecast available and the public is aware of what they need to do, that means, you know, you have like the Hong Kong one. Then people don't get caught. Let's say, you know, when situation is black in Hong Kong, nobody move. Everybody, if you are in office, you stay in your office. If you are at home, you stay at home. And so which means that the mechanism to come and help is not being what you call disturbed by, you know, people's movement, or, you know, you have jam in the highway and all that sort of thing. So there must be education or there must be a standard SOP for extreme weather, for Kuala Lumpur especially. You know, what are the, you know, color coded? We have that for haze,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but we should have this also
For
for,
floods as well.
yeah,
Yes. Okay.
for KL.
Yeah, so talking about not just warnings and mitigation measures, but also not just response, but also how we can actually prepare beforehand. I'm going to go to you, Dr. Renat, with that question after this. But now it's time for us to take a short break. Before we delve deeper into the discussion, let's take a look at some of the natural disasters that have happened in the country, beginning in December 2021 until January or early 2022. Let's watch.
By landslide, you're not.
Back with us on NST Insight, a forum where we discuss the latest and hottest issues pertaining to Malaysia. And what you just watched during the break or just now was some natural occurrences in the country from December until early this year. Now, today we're talking about climate change and weather extremes and fluctuations in the weather and what we can actually do to overcome them, or actually our response to the situation. Because during the break we were having a short discussion with our panelists, and Professor Dr. Azizan said floods are going to happen whether you like it or not. So the issue is how we respond to them and how we tackle the problem. Now, back to our panelists in the studio. So I'm moving on to you, Dr. Renard. So before the break, Professor Dr. Azizan talked about having a pre-response sort of mitigation measure. So having a code as they do in Hong Kong. What do you think about this? How can Malaysians actually implement something like this so that we can be better prepared for incidences in the future?
Oh, I mean, I was going to say that I absolutely concur with Prof. Azizan, and I think it's such a brilliant idea to actually have that sort of coding, that if you like. But the key here is really about communication, right?
Indeed.
So it's not just telling your citizens in hotspot areas that, oh yeah, you know, that there's a red flag, you know, but the next part of the equation is actually what do you do about it? So I think all of that sort of training or communication around resiliency needs to take place, especially for citizens that have been marked, right, that are located around hotspot areas. That sort of education and emphasis, I think, needs to be conducted on the ground, especially if they're living at high-risk areas. But I think also forums and workshops, you know, like to sort of just mark up that sort of level, heighten that sort of level of awareness, I think it's important.
Yeah, okay, so talking about hotspots and risky areas, we're not just looking at floods, because floods and high rainfall, it actually affects residents in terms of landslides, which can also happen. So in terms of landslides, people who need to pay more attention are people who live in these risky areas on hill slopes, as an example. How can these people be better prepared to protect themselves? Because in incidences such as landslides, it often involves the loss of life. So we need to prevent that. That's a very big factor in this. What's your comment on that?
Well, I think, firstly, I think we've touched a little bit on the coding, right, on that sort of signal that needs to be given to citizens actually living in hotspot areas. And I think Jabatan Mineral and Geoscience have already highlighted about 144 hotspot areas that are prone to landslides. So citizens who are living in that area needs to pay more attention and be more alert, for sure. I think there are also citizens themselves needs to be trained to look out for any moving debris, like fences, boulders, or even unusual tilting, right, of trees. That in itself is already a signal that, you know, especially after a heavy downpour, that something is not right somewhere and that they should definitely take precaution. But also from a resiliency perspective, I think it's good to have some sort of 72-hour survival kit, you know, in place, just in case if you have to move or told to move out of your housing in an emergency situation. Not just those who are experiencing landslides, but also floods in general.
Yes. So I guess, gentlemen, the key takeaway here today is the information is there, the sort of danger is there, but we need to heighten awareness and we need people to actually take notice more on these issues. Okay, Professor Dr. Azizan, moving on to you, we'll talk about government planning and government policy. Do you think that the effects of climate change and global warming in Malaysia are actually taken into account in terms of government planning and policy in the country?
Well, I think if you want to look at Singapore as a good example, I mean, they do make sure that they now, because of sea level rise, they do plan for building of 100 years or something that they're going to use hospitals. I mean, they move it further inland, and I think there is a bit of zonation. You know, let's say in Kuantan, you know, they don't really try and build a hospital near Kuantan anymore. I mean, they try to move it to more further inland. So they do consider. I mean, zonation is a soft engineering that needs to be taken seriously, which means that, you know, especially when you want to build big institution, you know, like that you think that it's going to last for 100 years, then you should take into consideration the sea level rise that may occur. And as you can see in terms of Batu Buruk as an example, you know, the hospital in KT is very near Batu Buruk itself. I mean, it looks very nice, but you know, it is now more prone to high tides coming in. So what you need to do is that if you do plan to build another hospital, then you know you then need to think about where is the best site. So zonation is a good way forward. You know, Kelantan also practice zonation. I mean, in the floodplain of the Sungai Kelantan, most likely it's just for grazing. They don't go and build a building. Now, having said that, you know, places like Kuala Lumpur is different. It grew in a floodplain area. Okay, because it grew in a floodplain area and become a very important city. So you need to protect the assets in the city, because every flood in Kuala Lumpur, the cost of the flood might be what, 100 million or maybe 1 billion. So smart tunnel is one way. The other way is, you know, the trying to divert the extra rainfall to a flood retention pond. I think the best that I can mention is Horus, which is the one that we have off Sungai Selangor, in which the capacity is twice the amount of the Sungai Selangor Dam. And that, you know, that's one of the main reason why, you know, even though the rainfall was quite a lot and Sungai Kelang went up, but they put the Horus in, that saved the Sungai Selangor River from flooding. So these are some of the major investment that need to be made to protect the important asset in Klang Valley. As an example, you know, in terms of, let's say, Bangkok, or in terms of Hanoi, they will flood the whole upstream of Bangkok, the whole upstream of Hanoi, to protect Hanoi from being flooded. Now, but we don't have that luxury, because you know, the distance between Kuala Lumpur and the sea is not much. You know, we are quite a small, you know, quite hilly area. So the only place that we can do is use our old tin mining lakes, and then, you know, try and divert the extra water to this lake, or make Horus like what you have in Sungai Selangor, which is also old tin mining lakes. So these are some of the innovation that needs to be done, but it involves a lot of investment.
Indeed.
It's not a cheap thing.
Yes.
You know, you want to build Horus, you know, you're talking about, you know, 100 million or something like that. So even when you want to do a retention pond for Klang Valley, it's a major investment. And when you have major investment, you know, the only people is a state-private must come into being. I mean, come into play. And to ask the normal citizen to stop the flood, I don't think the normal citizen can do. I mean, they can adapt. You know, they can do something, you know, as you know, have a bag or something like that. But to really decrease the incident, you know, you talk about the smart tunnel. Smart tunnel is what? How many billion?
Yeah.
That's a sort.
Yeah.
But is this worth to protect? Because as I said, in terms of, for KL, one flood, major flood in KL will cost us about 100 million. So when you think about the smart tunnel, it's been opened nearly 75 times. So it saves us nearly $7,500 million already, nearly 7 billion. And so, you know, for the cost, is what I call okay. So this is something that we need to protect Klang Valley, because Klang Valley is the center of the economic activity.
Yes.
Right? And, you know, we have to do something to make sure that, you know, we can cut down the issue of flooding, because flooding is going to be there. It's not going to go away.
Indeed. It's how we deal with it, which is going to matter in the long run. That's what you're saying, Professor. Encik Mohammed Helmi, what about from Malaysia? Speaking about all the effects of climate change on Malaysia, floods, landslides, especially we've had floods which have affected 8 states at one time.
Yes.
So in terms of the same question, I think, government planning and also policy, what do you think are some of the other measures which we can take, not just from Malaysia, I think perhaps on a general level, to prevent these incidences or worse incidences from happening?
Of course, I mentioned about upgrading our early warning system. We are seeking additional fund to even increase our computing capability. our high performance computing system is currently producing forecasts at very high resolution of around 1 km. And for the KL area, city area in greater KL area, is about 333 meter resolution, so it's a very high resolution. But that is probably not enough, and we are thinking of increasing that and also running high resolution models over other areas as well, because it's not just Kuala Lumpur that is affected, but all the major cities. Major cities are more prone because they are a lot of people there living there, and of course you have that extra something known as the urban heat island effect, which means that thunderstorms are more prone in the city areas compared to the rural areas. It's hotter because it's an urban jungle compared to the rural areas, so winds tend to converge, and this extra heat there, you have more aerosols, which will lead to the formation of thunderstorms, huge thunderstorms over the city areas. So forecasting or increasing the warning capability for the city area is really important for us. And also, of course, education is very important, because the public needs to be properly educated on the dangers of weather phenomenon. For example, thunderstorms in the afternoon. We read in the news about workers still working on high-rise buildings, even when there's a thunderstorm nearby. So that's very risky. You can see the platform where they were on swinging.
Yeah.
It was a really very scary. I was really said, why is that happening? That means they were not aware, they're not alert of the dangers that is posed by thunderstorm, because thunderstorm can lightning can cause lightning. It also can cause strong winds, strong wind gusts. Those are very those are weather hazards which can cause injuries. So they need to be, the awareness, the level of awareness have to be heightened, have to be raised. And Malaysia, of course, prior to the MCO, we have been conducting awareness campaigns on weather extremes, even earthquake and tsunami, throughout the country since 2006. Yearly, on a yearly basis, we'll go to, in cooperation with NADMA, of course, and also the local authorities. We have conducted many hundreds or even thousands of awareness campaigns throughout the country. And this is to educate the public on the dangers posed by extreme weather, such as thunderstorm, heavy rainfall, and also what to do when an extreme weather is occurring, or when thunderstorm is occurring, what they should do, what they should not do. And those are the some of the initiatives that we have embarked on over the past few years. And of course, during this MCO, where movement is restricted, we are using the social media. We are using all the available electronic platforms to conduct awareness campaigns. We produce infographics from time to time, especially during the start of a new season. For example, the intermonsoonal period, which is now occurring, which started on the 14th of March, is known for more frequent thunderstorms in the afternoon. So we've published infographics on what are the steps that they can be, can be taken to avoid unwanted incidents during this period. Yeah.
Very well. Okay, so after this, I want to touch a bit about the IPCC report if we have time. But
Before that, I'm going to move on to Dr. Renard for a moment. Still talking about the government policies, what do you think are the roles of industries? Because they play a huge part in the global warming and climate change aspect. So what are the roles of the industries in actually implementing these environmental policies in companies in Malaysia?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we can all agree on is to tackle the climate crisis, it's complex. It requires a whole of government, whole of society approach, right?
Yes.
So on the government side, I think we've already, been in discussion the need for a climate change act. I think even since 2018, which not just focuses on mitigation but also adaptation aspects.
Yes.
But with industries, I think there is a need to really step up as well, especially since the country, as a whole in Malaysia, we've already sort of made a public declaration that we have this aspiration of wanting to be, a carbon neutral country at least by the year 2050.
Yeah.
What this means is that primary industries that are involved in oil and gas and fossil fuels also need to look into this seriously and look at what are some of the transformation efforts. So, but I am encouraged, I would have to say. I think even around our neighboring countries, like Singapore, for example, Singapore Stock Exchange, they've already made it mandatory for publicly listed corporations to actually report and declare their climate disclosures through TCFD, the Task Force for Climate Financial Disclosures. And I'm hoping that we would be able to see that as well in Malaysia as we move around. Because there is such a strong need. Like a lot of these industries are pumping up greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, like year on year, but they need to be accountable for it. They need to start measuring how much is it that they're emitting and what is it that they're doing to cut down on such emissions or transition to cleaner renewable fuels. So there's a lot of this dialogue, discussions that I think need to take place before we can actually achieve that aspiration as a country to be green.
Okay.
I would like to say in the sense that when you think about how China is moving, China is now moving for electric vehicle and also for solar panel. They have enormous solar panel to generate their electricity. I think Tenaga also is trying to get 30% of their energy from solar panels. And what I'm trying to say is that we are a small country, and if, let's say, Europe, let's say somewhere down the future, go for electric vehicle, I mean, where are we going to sell our Prador? Where are we going to sell our... this is something that is happening. China also, when you go to China, all the motorcycles in China now is EV.
Yeah.
And so what I'm trying to say is that whether for the industry, whether they like it or they don't like it, being an open economy, being a trader economy, how the international community is going to change and adapt to climate change. If we are not nimble enough to adapt with it, then we'll be at the dinosaur.
Yes,
absolutely.
yes.
And I have to say that, we need to turn this climate crisis into a real opportunity. There are opportunities for industries to really expand on innovation, to really leverage, on AI, to improve resiliency, adaptation, improving forecasting. Even in the agriculture sector, people are already talking about, how can we actually use precision agriculture so that we can cut down on the need for water to ensure that the soil or fertilizers that we use, is the optimum, is at its optimum usage. So there's tons of opportunities here that are unexplored, and I think we can truly be a leader if we put our heads together.
Indeed, indeed.
Well, the only thing that we are now sort of delving into carbon trading. I think with some controversy, of course, in Sabah and Sarawak, and I think Kenyir, the Kenyir National Park is a potential for carbon trading in terms of carbon sequestration. And it's a new area. Indonesia has gone into it already. They're getting maybe a few billion dollars of carbon trading sequestration. It's under the REDD, if I'm not mistaken. So Malaysia, we have a few. We have in Sabah, and we have also in Danau, Maliau, that can be used for that carbon trading. So it's innovation, because the way the world is going to change is that the world is going to go for less fossil fuel, the world is going to go for net zero, because the international community feel that if temperature rise more than 2 degrees, it's not acceptable in terms of the status quo.
Indeed, indeed.
It causes too much havoc to the status quo.
Yes. Well, gentlemen, of course, it's been it's a very insightful discussion today. I have many more questions to ask you guys, but unfortunately, we have only a few minutes left, and we also have our viewers on Facebook and YouTube who have asked us a few questions for our panelists. So I'll move on to that. So we have actually 2 questions for Met Malaysia.
Yeah, okay.
So our viewers have asked, how can people get information other than the app, if especially if they're not tech savvy, or they don't have access to technology?
The easiest, of course, is via phone call. We have still users or people who still use the traditional way of calling our offices, because we are operational 24/7, and they can just give us a call, drop us a call, and we'll be able to provide them with the information, or whether there's a warning in force or not. Or that's one way. They also can visit our website. As I mentioned, maybe those who are not technically savvy, they can also watch the television or listen for radio broadcasts of the warnings, because once a warning has been issued, it will be broadcasted by the radio and television station quite frequently.
Yes.
So those are the not just using My Cuaca or via the social media, platform, but also through the other platform. In fact, we have used all possible means of communicating the warnings to the public.
Okay, there's another question for Met Malaysia. What are the measures taken by Met Malaysia to make sure that the warnings are taken seriously by the public?
As I mentioned, we have embarked on awareness campaigns since 2006, and we continue to embark on the campaigns through now electronically, because we restricted in our movement. We are not able to go physically to places which we think are high-risk areas in the country. So we are broadcasting. From time to time, we have something known as webinars, where we invite experts from within our department and also outside our department to discuss on issues pertaining to weather, to extreme weather, to floods and so on and so forth. And the viewers, they can catch us on Facebook, or even we also have our own YouTube channel where the public can view some of the programs that we have already recorded beforehand. So those are the ways that I think the users can raise the awareness of the usage of the warnings, because our warnings are color coded. It's already color coded, especially for the heavy continuous rainfall warning. There are 3 types of warning: yellow, orange, and red. So they are easy enough to be understood, because red is the highest category. So it's already there, but it just depends on the public, whether they take it seriously or whether they wait. Even a stage yellow warning, which is known as an alert level, or waspada in Bahasa, should be taken seriously, because it doesn't mean you have to wait for the red to.
It's an early sign.
It's an early sign of the impending severe weather. So take that seriously. Don't wait for the second one or third one. Yellow is enough for them to take actions.
Okay. So I think the final question, it doesn't say who it's directed to. So I think I'm going to ask Professor Dr. Aziza this question. It says that the statements given today here are too general. So this person wants to know, what are the solutions to Malaysia's flooding problems? As simple as that.
I mean, Malaysia, in the future, we're going to have flooding. I mean, there's no such thing as, we are what you call a water surplus country. Every year In Peninsula, we have nearly 2 meters of water. In Sabah and Sarawak, it's about 4 meters of water per year. I mean, can you imagine 4 meters? Okay, that's every year. So, issue of flooding is something that is not going to go away. Now, there's no what you call silver bullet in which you wish away the flooding. Every monsoon, northeast monsoon, there's going to be flooding. It's the question of whether it's going to be bad or whether it's just normal. So now, how do you adapt to it? I mean, how do you adapt to it? I mean, there is soft engineering, as I said. You use zone, you do all sort of things like wetlands in Putrajaya. That's how we solve by soft engineering, or we can do the hard engineering, the horrors of Sungai Selangor or the smart tunnel. I mean, depending on the asset that you want to be protected, because then it is worth the cost benefit of protecting the assets. So this sort of investment is major. I mean, when you say that you want to protect Jakarta, it's $2 billion to protect Jakarta. So this is something in which a normal person cannot do. It must be done on a bigger scale. Similarly, when you talk about the global problem of climate change, a single state cannot solve the problem. It must take an international issue, because you're talking about tons and tons of carbon dioxide that's going to be released. So you need international cooperation to do it. And we as a good global citizen then need to persuade our minister, to have the political will, not only Malaysia, but to have Thailand, China, and all, to have the political will, because we have only one world. So we muck up this world, we don't have any other place to stay. So that's my last thing that I would say.
All right, so that is the final point from Professor Dr. Azizan. I think before we wrap, we only have about 1 minute left. So I think I'm going to ask you, Dr. Renard, very briefly, based on what Professor Dr. Azizan said just now, not a single state can actually act on it. It takes a concerted effort, a global effort. So people are often asking, when things like this happen, what can I do? How can I help? So are individual efforts enough to help these situations?
Well, I think cumulatively, for sure. I mean, like we are a population of 32 million, so it definitely adds up. If we make that decision to switch off, lights when we're not using, or decide to carpool, it definitely adds up. And a lot of people come to me and say that, oh, I feel extremely hopeless with the current situation. But for me, the advice has always been, take that first step, act. Everyone can do something about this. So, it's all about working together and having that mindset that, we can hopefully cap temperatures from increasing by 1.5 degrees, which is really what, COP has been aiming for. And it's something that we have to do.
I think for Malaysia, for me, the more important thing is we tend to forget our biodiversity, because that is one heritage that we have for the world. I mean, you think about the South China Sea, 70% of the South China of coral species of the world is in the South China Sea. And you talk about our mangrove, 70 or 80% of the biodiversity of the mangrove of the world is in our region.
We are the 12th most mega diverse country in the world.
So we also have an obligation, not only to ourselves, to our future generation, and also to the global generation, because these are refugees, which means that if there are climate change and the sea becomes a bit warmer, there may be species in our refuge that can then colonize new areas and grow. And this is our heritage and our responsibility. And so climate change to me in Malaysia must always be linked to biodiversity. You cannot talk about climate change for Malaysia without linking it to biodiversity.
Indeed. And on that note, gentlemen, unfortunately, we've run out of time for today's NST Insight. That was Professor Dato Dr. Azizan Abu Sama, meteorology expert from UM. We also had Dr. Renard Siu, climate change advisor, St. GPS, and adjunct professor of innovation and sustainability at UNITAR. And also, not forgetting from Met Malaysia, Muhammad Hilmi Abdullah, the Director General of Malaysian Meteorological Department. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us today on today's forum. And that's it for today's show. I think Professor Dato Dr. Azizan said it best just now when he said, flooding is not going to go away. It's always going to be there. So the question is how we deal with it. And it doesn't take just one person or one state to deal with the situation. It's a concerted and global effort that needs time and also money to actually mitigate and also look at the response in terms of how we handle the situation and how we handle it best to protect lives and also the environment. That's the key here, I think. Well, that's it for today's NST Insight. Thank you so much for joining us today, and join us again next time for more insights that matter. I'm Azaria Tagaya. We'll see you again next time. Bye.